navigate family dynamics, navigate the ways in which we share care or are preventative, right, in certain aspects, whether it be in familial dynamics and then moving it towards to workspace for us in the academy, right? And I often say, puedo platicar con muchos, pero puedo chismear con pocos. So, I can talk to a lot of people, but I can only kick and spill the tea with a few because I gotta trust you, right? So then this trust becomes this like relational praxis in order to continue to engage in talking about some of these experiences. Because who knows, maybe in these experiences, I'm going to name the fact that this person that you really admire caused harm, right? And how do we negotiate with that? Then we go into Contour 4, which is conocimiento to joteria, identity, and consciousness, where we say that through the meaning making and having this chisme and engaging in this care, in the same time, we're reckoning with that past, present, and potential future of ourselves. So when I've had quick pláticas with my collaborators, in the plática, we have these moments of like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So those aha moments are that like conocimiento towards identity and consciousness of our joteria, right? And those moments come from whether it be laughter, whether it be pain, right? Whether it could be the gamut of these emotions, but nevertheless helping make meaning and asserting a different way of being and doing. And then towards this like contour 5 of Mundo Surdos as queer futurity, of imagining what would it mean to engage in a world where like we didn't experience these things, right? What would it mean to be able to have these conversations every day, right? Because in the doing, we are creating, right? So when I think about Mundo Surdos, when I think about queer futurity, it was like, well, what is it? It's both in the present and in an aspiration. Because in the moment that we do it, we're creating for that. We are creating it in that moment in time, ¿verdad? And then we depart, and then maybe that moment in time departs too, but we know we can recreate it because we've done it before, right? So I think for us, that's kind of that aspirational piece of also a mundo surdo as queer futurity of creating worlds yet imagine and working towards that. Um, so ultimately, these are the five contours of queer pláticas. But I just wanted to, yeah, get your insights, reflections, comments, reactions from reading the article, and any questions that might have emerged.
Should we do the questions first, or should we let Anita present and then?
Como quieras.
I guess any initial questions? I have one. Yeah. For the conocimiento to Joteria identity consciousness, while reading it and reading the examples from Dr. Orozco, I was kind of wondering, how do you like make sure you don't cross the line when you're asking those questions and like lead the person to where you want them to? Like, how do you take a step back and make sure you're just asking the question and let them kind of navigate their own story?
Oof, I would say, it's part of allowing the breathing space. Sometimes we want to jump in when the silence happens. And Queer Pláticas is not interested in like this idea of being unbiased, right? Because that resides within westernized ways of knowing and doing, right? Where we are seen as neutral, but we are never neutral. And if anything, it brings us into opposition of that through like decolonial ways of doing and thinking, where like we are part of the research process, right? And there is moments of that, like, oh my gosh, me too, and like we interchange that at the same time, right? Where the knowledge production happens in relation with, ¿verdad? And that's difficult because traditional ways of research have told us that we have to create that separation, which what we say is a mind body spirit split that cannot be afforded to us. ¿Verdad? If anything, we're wanting to put the mind body spirit together and not just for the self, but also our collaborators, because together we're putting it together for our broader communities too.
So, so say more about your question. Like,
Yeah, so in the article, like I feel like the questions you that were used here were like a good way of like when you ask those questions to a participant,
you're really letting them speak. And
Can you share what the questions were?
yeah, so the first one is, how do you come to identify as queer? What were some of the challenges that you face in claiming your queerness? Like,
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's very open-ended and not pushing anyone to answer a certain way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was just struggling with like, how do you make sure you don't cross that line to push someone a certain way?
Yeah, I think part of it too is that in our calls for collaborators, right? Like particularly in our calls for collaborators in our research studies, it's like we're seeking people that identify as queer, who identify as Latinx, Latino, Latina, right? And so the Joteria identity, um, what's the first contour again?
Rooted in Jotek's, like our truth, Jotek's identity,
Yeah.
and yeah.
So I think there's an understanding that you have already self-selected to be a part of this like queer plática, and that our joteria is gonna look it's gonna our journeys into joteria is gonna be very different.
Yeah.
But like we have to name it, right? Like you self-selected into this study, and so therefore I'm under the assumption that you identify as such, right? Now, how that journey is, that's where those questions sort of come into play.
I have a question too. Follow up. Was there ever any time when you were in one of those conversations where like things just weren't clicking or you felt like the person was resistant or like not trusting and kind of like how would you navigate that conversation differently? Or did that change like the way you approached it, I guess?
Hmm.
I mean, I would say in the time scale I've used queer pláticas, no. I would say I often it's the flip side. Like people are just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like I feel like I could just share. I feel like I could just open up. Versus if they were to receive a standard like, hi, I have 9 questions. We have 30 minutes and we're gonna like there's a sanitation that happens in that process, right? That also creates like just a divide of what can I share or not. And we lose so much in that because I'm like, well, by default, if we're talking about being racialized, sexualized, right, and just navigating this idea of the unruly body, how much of that will get just not even provided the space to be made meaning of, right? So for us, I think, at least for me, it's been the flip side where I've had people, um, I mean, further, como se dice, share and the beautiful part that's come about it in Queer Platicas too, that's important to note is the relational aspect. I continue to have relationships with my collaborators, right? So like right now that I went to Salt Lake City for the conference, one of my collaborators was the person who picked me out of the airport and took me to the hotel, right? Because we've continued our relationship, even though we barely see each other, ¿verdad? But like we still talk to each other, we see each other in conferences, lo que sea. And they were like, "Oh, I want to pick you." I'm like, "Okay," but that is, I think, a result of the relationality aspect of queer pláticas.
Yeah, I think to answer that question for me too, since now I'm part of this panel too now.
Nobody asked you, girl. Nobody asked you why you jumping in.
Well, because I can.
She's like, "Cause I co-authored it
And
too."
reading and meeting. I'm just kidding. Um, so so this article came about from mine, Sergio and Angel's dissertation, where we use pláticas, but we were like Angel said, right? Like
Hmm.
something queer about there's something about Joteria that had them events really centered. And
Hmm.
so for me, in my dissertation work, I had a relationship with all my collaborators. And
Hmm.
so like there was already a trust built in. Now I think about my current longitudinal study where I don't know any of these students. And I'm actually using queer pláticas, right, in the ways that we wrote it. Because like I said, we didn't use queer pláticas like explicitly.
Mm.
And so now I'm using queer pláticas for the first time explicitly, and I'm naming that as like, hey, I'm looking for collaborators who want to engage in 6 to 8 queer pláticas over 3 to 4 years. And these are also students who are like ages 18, 19, right? Um, who are from the Midwest and whose understanding of Joteria is very much rooted in this derogatory historical understanding. And so for me, I have to come in with the
like I come in trying to gauge where they're at in their own journey because I also know that for some of them it's like being in college is one of the first times they're like naming their queerness. Um, you know, I originally my longitudinal study originally was looking at queer and trans students of color, and this summer I made the decision to just solely focus on queer and trans Latinx students. But I had already collected data with six students who were students of color, who were primarily Muslim, right? And that was that was an interesting experience for me, particularly because I don't have the cultural or like the cultural aspect of what it means to be brought up Muslim, but also the intersections of religion, right? And so, but they were asking like, what is a queer plática? Like, so I had to explain to them what a queer plática is, and then explain to that, like, I share this because there was still a level of trust because I was coming in, letting them know why I was doing this work, but also that I too identify as a queer Latino from the Midwest, and I think it's important for us to tell our stories. But like a lot of these students were not out to their families, right? And so this was also one of the few spaces that they've had the opportunity to actually sort of desahogar. How do you say desahogar in English? Like
To release.
to release and just like almost like word vomit, right? All of their experiences.
To vent and trauma dump.
Yeah, basically trauma dump.
But in Spanish, the significance is actually more powerful because if you think about it literally, it's to undrown yourself.
Yep.
So when you're drowning, a mechanism of survival is to desahogar,
Mhm.
to release what's inside of you that's hurting you
Uh, yeah.
or impacting you.
I also want to add to the point about trust, right? Trust is like a constant negotiation. So even though we did have some like perhaps connections to our collaborators in our dissertation study, the trust was further solidified through the Queer Platica, right? So for me, I had multiple touch points as well. Like I had this original, like I had testimonials individually, and then queer chisme sessions. That's where the queer chisme contour comes because I had queer chisme sessions with collective of collaborators, right? But through that series, I think of touch points, we further established the trust, ¿verdad? Entonces, trust is not like it's not just given, it's earned, right? And that earning, it's ongoing, it's relational, right? Because you might do something that makes me think like, wait a minute, I don't know if I can trust you anymore, right? Like you maybe
Sure,
seen that
sure.
before, where you're like, I used to trust this person, and you said something, did something, algo pasó, and you're all of a sudden like, wait up, kitty girl, like I don't know. So I think that's part of también that part, of the trust being an ongoing relational practice.
And it's very it's both with the collaborators, but also within yourself. Am I trusting of myself that I'm also going to do right? Right? Like because there were moments where I had to negotiate like I'm coming in like I hope they trust me. I hope they trust me, right? And so you're constantly negotiating that like not to sort of not in a paternalistic way, but in a way of like Angel said, right? Like relational. And so it also happens very internally, the reflexivity process. Other questions for Angel or Anita before Anita? I'm sure there's more. Anita, did you want to um do your presentation and then we'll open it
Yeah,
up?
let me do mine.
Thank you for recording too.
Yeah, I was thinking, I thought about it too late, but it's all Joteria for the Joteria archives. Everything we do is for the archives. Um,
How many photos do you have on your phone?
um, let's see.
Anita takes so many photos.
Where's the number? I have it here on my screen. Let's see. Oh, I probably got to get out of the library. No. So just to give you a sense, the portraits are 2,210. Video live photos, 52,878. So I take pictures of everything. I really am committed to telling our visual stories. Yes?
How much storage do you have on your phone?
Oh, I pay for the $9.99 a month with Apple. So I don't know what that gives you, but it gives me a lot.
Yes.
All right, let me start share. That's why I asked Angel to go first because I, of course, was adding more photos, and even this one doesn't do it justice, but the modes. I will put this, well, I've already put it in the chat and your profe has it. So feel free to share it with anybody who would like it.
I'll add
Um,
to our
but
Canvas that
yeah,
we do.
so um, the title of my essay is Joteria, Identity and Consciousness. It was co-authored with my colega, amiga, hermana, which means colleague and sister, Jose Manuel Santillana. We use gender very fluidly, but he does definitely feel like a sister more than a brother because my brother is very patriarchal. And Manuel has some patriarchy because we all do, but he definitely is a mujerista. And so this essay is rooted or comes from the origin is his thesis and my dissertation. I studied a group of women called Raza Women, the UCLA, and this is how small our worlds are. I had graduated and left to Vegas, and Jose Manuel had become roommates with one of the women from the org that I did my dissertation on from Raza Women. So literally, we shared mujerista communities, but like 1 or 2 years removed. And so when I met Jose Manuel, who we call Menyo, he had already dove deep into his own Joteria identity and his own, and he was beginning, I think, a Mujerista consciousness, one that we developed together. And the photos that you see here are primarily from Vegas. Um, we have a community there. We say that Mujeristas and Joteria, now I'm including them, are kind of like a diaspora or like a galaxy of mujeristas with that like goes in different directions. So once we leave one location, one geographic location, we recreate mujerista community wherever we go. And it's rooted in our values. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Again, this is Jose Manuel Santillana. He's an assistant professor of American Studies at UC Davis. My name is Anita Revilla. I'm a professor and former chair of Chicanx Latinx Studies at Cal State LA. I'm here at work today. And just something that I wanted to pull out for you all to think about because we take for granted that people know what these terms mean is that heteronormativity, which denotes or relates to a worldview that promotes heterosexuality as the norm or preferred sexual orientation, it lives deep in bodies and minds. Many of us, even queer people, practice heteronormativity, right? When we maybe get married and act in traditional married ways. Some of us do it, because we're trying to get insurance and they still are resisting the institution of marriage. But it's a slippery slope when it becomes heteronormative and when it's truly radical behavior and non-heteronorm. And then from that, I want you to think about this concept, heterosexual supremacy. So first, I'll read the definition of white supremacy. The belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other racial and ethnic groups. Secondly, it's the social and economic political systems that collectively enable white people to maintain power over people of other races. My colleague in Pan-African Studies, I'm sitting in their department, calls it the delusion of white supremacy. He doesn't use white supremacy alone. So, and we can talk about that later if you want. But I adapt this definition to heterosexual supremacy, meaning that, and for short terms, you can just take out, white and put in heterosexual and put in, queer and gender in the racial and ethnic spaces, and that'll be another definition. But to shorten it, it is the belief that heterosexuals are superior to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, plus people. And the legal, social, political oppression, it manifests as these oppressions of queer and trans people as normal, right? And I'll give you another example. When queer people come out to their parents or their family members, parents and friends and family will say, "I still love you, even though you're gay." Think about if we said the same thing to an African American, to a Black person. "I still love you, even though you're Black." Like, that sounds incredibly paternalistic, and it reifies that it is still better to be either white from the first example or, you know, straight from the second example. Like, you still want your person to be queer, I mean straight. Um, and so therefore you're seeing heterosexuality as superior. Some parents will say, for example, "I don't want my child to be queer because I don't want them to experience bullying and or harm." But they become their child's first bully because they are preventing their child from living their true selves. And so we, as a collective of queer and feminist scholars, we call ourselves Joteria and Mujerista scholars. Um, we are speaking back to that, we are interrupting it, and we are transforming that belief. And not only transforming it, but eliminating this delusion of heterosexual supremacy. And feel free to write down your questions as you go along, I go along, because I would love to hear them. Any comments or not well, suggestions, but comments or reflections. And so you heard about or joteria. Um, it is a derogatory term that has been reclaimed, similarly to the word Black, similarly to um, the word queer. What else? Some people have reclaimed the word bitch, right? Because one of my students said this, the word is weaponized, and in reclaiming it, you de-weaponize it, right? You make it yours, and you get to define it. So we have several different definitions of joteria. There's different origins. For the simplest term is that it's queer Latinx people, Latinx, Chicanx, and indigenous people sometimes claim this. And it is more heavily used in Mexico and the US. So we tell stories kind of like counter stories. They're personal narratives in our work that are based on joteria groups, essentially marginalized groups that are challenging these dominant and stories and deficit theories. We use Jota Historias to challenge the erasure of our identities and experiences. We also use them to prevent the silencing of Jotex, and I use X for gender inclusion, identities in Chicanx and LGBTQ plus movements. It is addressed through these testimonials. And so I just have a little reflection here, like how can your personal story serve as a counter story or Jotex, historia? You might play with this term, which is obviously what I've done, right? We have queer stories, we have I also talk about mujer historias and her story, of course. So the cool thing about being a scholar is that you get to create language and create knowledge. So this is a term that we are committed to continuing to use because it allows us to do these things that I just mentioned. Also want to talk a little bit about the actual activism. So Joteria activism is rooted in intersectional social justice, multidimensional consciousness. It blends personal identities and political action. And examples of these folks are there used to be a group called La Joteria de UCLA. That's basically what Jose Manuel was writing about in his thesis. And also Raza Women is no longer active at UCLA, but they were there for almost 40 years. And again, these two groups are doing the intersectional, multidimensional social change and collective empowerment for both for themselves on campus and for society off campus. This is a picture of Raza women in 2001. So it tells you a little bit about my commitment to my research. These people are still my friends, just like Angel said. They were first partners in the research, in action research, what that I call Mujerista action research. And then they became lifelines and friends. And it has been 24 years, 25 years since we started this journey together. And so myself as a mujerista, because I'm the third one in, I too was a part of Raza Women as an action research project. And so I bring all of my knowledge and all of my values and consciousness that I adopted from Raza Women to Joteria identity and consciousness. So you'll maybe, if you read my work, you'll notice that I include mujerista and joteria because not all Jotecs or queer Latinx people or queer people, period, are feminist. And I am clear that without the feminist aspect, the Joteria identity is lacking. And there are sexist patriarchal queers, sexist patriarchal women who have internalized these concepts and uphold them. And so I don't pretend that that's not true. So you'll see here, I'm here in the center, and I'm here in the University of Minnesota, where we had a conference, and Jose Manuel in the center, and Joanna on the right in the dress, and Irina in the beige t-shirt. They were PhD students. Actually, just Joanna and Manuel were PhD students at University of Minnesota, and Irina got her master's in social work there. They hosted a Joteria conference for us, and the other folks are board members. So there's this melting together that has happened again with this Joteria space and organization, and the way that I believe Roberto and I, and perhaps Angel, look at their work. We look at Joteria as inextractable from Mujerista practice and values. So, of course, there's intersectionality, multidimensional struggle, and continued activism. We consider ourselves activist scholars, and we consider these historias a form of internal resistance, also activism, challenging dominant narratives, advocating for systemic change, and then that's a repeat. So, if you have not yet seen my article on Mujerista pedagogy, it's very important for understanding my work. And you'll see if you read it how it overlaps with the tenets of Joteria identity and consciousness. You'll also see like limited language, like it's still binary, like male, female, Latina, Latino. That's because I continue to grow. And if Jose Manuel, Angel, and I sat down and created characteristics or tenets today of Joteria identity and consciousness, they would be probably longer, maybe shorter, more concise, but they would grow. These are living concepts and theories and frameworks that guide our research and our um, how we live our lives, actually, how we practice these things both inside and outside of the classroom. Um, I'll show you a little bit more about the organization and conference that we just went to. Maybe Roberto has already shared this with you, but I really love the mission and vision of AHAS. AHAS is an organization dedicated to nurturing queer, Latinx, Chicanx culture through practices that recognize the intimate relations of art, activism, and scholarship. For us, Joteria represents a decolonizing Latinx, Chicanx, feminist, queer consciousness in praxis. By way of community building and knowledge sharing, we facilitate a generative and communal space to map and shape our stories towards a homeland, Joteria homeland. Um, and this already I want to change, right? But it's still developing on paper in in our, I guess, what are they called, Roberto? That we have to revise regularly, our bylaws. And then our vision, I really like the second part of this is a healthy joteria that embodies familia, including chosen family, and contributes to a social ethos of humanization and transformation in the face of dehumanizing pressures. Our familias are grounded in establishing trust through communication, communicating truthfully and kindly. Aha's dreams of communities where members of Joteria flourish. Fluidity is what binds us. And Roberto, you can let me know, but I've seen the vision differently shared recently. So I haven't been on, like, I haven't worked on the bylaws in a long time, and I know that they have. So I don't know if this vision is still intact, but this is the vision that I live by and that I, hold dear to my work. And then I'm just gonna do a quick photo visual essay showing you the work that we've done. In 2007, we had our first conference called Towards a Queer Homeland. This is before the organization started. It was the Joto Caucus, the Queer Caucus, and myself hosting it in Las Vegas. And this is the group of people in 2007, which primarily were students and community workers, community people, and probably about a dozen professors or people just about to be professors, maybe even less than that. And then this was last 2 years ago in Los Angeles at the Plaza de la Raza. One of our commitments has been to try to continue to operate both on campus and off campus so that we can be in community. And then this was this year when we just came back, and you can see Angel on the far left, and our other colleagues who are doing the work and organized this conference in Utah. And then here you can see your Profe Roberto in his fabulous red shirt, red blouse, top of the S, and Roberto over here in the bottom left with our colleagues who are co-chairs. When you become a co-chair of this organization, you commit 6 years of your life. Dr. Ángel González is the incoming co-chair. So he's on the bottom right-hand side with Maya Chinchilla, who's a poet and lecturer and community person. So we're really excited because, again, like we've been working on this, I would say the whole 25 years that I did my dissertation research with Raza women has led us to this day in terms of the way that I contribute to this space. I've shared my thoughts, my values, and my institutional and home memory with my friends, including Profe Roberto and other mujeristas, and now I share it with Angel, and they share theirs with mine, and we're co-creating these spaces. To change the world for ourselves and others. And these are pictures of other people who are connected to us. This is Bambi Salcedo, a trans activist who again, she writes not a Joto historia, but a trans historia. Joteria is the power to laugh, the power to create, the power to feel to feel the power to exist, like the power to be unapologetic, to be sentimental, and to create hermandad, sisterhood, brotherhood. I don't know what the non-binary the siblinghood, and the power to create spaces, the power to, assert ourselves in our society. So I'm doing some new research, which includes interviews with trans and non-binary people in AHAS. So I haven't asked you yet, Angel, but I'm going to interview you soon, because I want their work to be highlighted in our work. For the first time ever, both this past couple of years and next, 2, 3 years, whatever, we have a majority of non-binary and trans people in our leadership. And that is super powerful and very telling because usually um, trans and non-binary people or gender non-conforming people are marginalized even in queer spaces. So I welcome their leadership and I'm excited to see what Angel creates. I hope that you might consider learning more about us and even going as an ally, regardless of sexual identity and regardless of race and ethnicity. As long as you center the needs of queer Latinx people, you are welcomed. And then I'll finish probably with Jose Manuel's definition. He says queer Latinx folks in particular are that calling each other Jotos or Jotas. And when I heard it in the mid 2000s, I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little weird about it, but then it felt so right, right? So a lot of people are like, why are they using that derogatory term? But he definitely captures how we have been on a journey with the term. I'll stop there and
I know I'm gonna
yeah,
have to leave in a few minutes because they teach class in a few minutes.
okay.
But you can also get there late, girl.
Maybe a questions for Angel before he leaves, and then you can send me any or give me any.
Yeah. I guess questions, either maybe comments, emotions, what resonated with you.
I can share, I feel like at the beginning of the class, we were kind of all talking about how it felt like, um, it was hard, challenging topics, like the first, couple of weeks. And I feel like this week, like just thinking about like joy and like the joy in conversations and the platicas is like, it's a cool way for us to see how like you can flip that methodology that's standard and like maybe more sterile or more like separate or more quote unquote neutral and objective, like on its head and like kind of get away from the like standard white Eurocentric way of thinking about qualitative research. So I think it's like super cool and I really appreciate reading the articles this week.
Thank you.
I think I have a question for both of you. I think this quote, our research participants' vision for social justice came from a collective effort to transform their lives and their communities. I guess my question would be, how do you see your participants bringing, the learnings and developments from the queer platicas into their communities, whether that be their families or their, work, professional lives, their friend groups? Like, how do you see that going beyond just that space in the queer platicas?
I'll let Angel answer.
Um, I mean, some did it differently, right? Like some of them, for example, because I guess it emerged from our dissertation work. For me, my collaborators are queer and trans Latinx community college leaders, right? So they left with like, oh, I'm gonna go advocate for this, or like they had this sense of I'm gonna do something because now like you made me think about, or this made me think about my practice, right? Like so one of my findings that I remember um engaging with, which I still need to write from it, was how their Joteria identity and consciousness provided them this like breaking of binary in practice, right? So because they understood like the policy, the context, their role, they also kind of situated themselves like, but it also doesn't say that I can't do X, Y, and Z, right? And I think they left with this like, oh wow, I'd never considered maybe more of the agency I had within my role or the agency I had to mobilize change, right? Because in business, sometimes we're like, oh, until I get this position, then I will blank, right? And we diminish agency. And I think a lot of what's going on, in the social political regime, I think it's that it wants to diminish agency. So we feel that there's nothing that we can do versus no, I'm able to do something from where I'm at. How that will look like will definitely matter based on where I'm at, but it doesn't mean I can't do anything, right? So I think for the Corpaticas, they left with the sense of urgency to activate something or do something, right? Um, and that doing also could look like, for example, I recently did a Corpaticas case study with a trans Latinas rural student, where I use Joteria identity and consciousness as my theoretical grounding. And for her, it was also kind of like, and I just want to rest. The doing is like, I don't want to do anything because I've been surviving in the institution that caused so much violence and harm to my existence that now is just, I just want to be, right? So the doing could look like literally, I'm gonna go try to continue the fight, or like I will rest as a source of like fighting and resistance.
I to build on that question, like Anita, how have you seen like or even Angel, your introduction, you introducing Joteria to like your students, right? And then Anita, you cultivating this like lineage of mujeristas. Like how have you seen all of these folks sort of take on this identity, right? This identity of what it means to be, but also how it means to be together, um, into their communities, into their familias. Like, do students come back and say, like, I talked to my families about X, Y, and Z, or like, I've now stepped into, I know Anka, you just presented with your students, but like, so you that's a good example, pero yeah, just how have you all seen people take up Mujerista and Joteria with the people you work with?
Yeah, it's for two. Okay. Um, for me, from my students, right, who I'm working with queer pláticas rurales from the valley, because I'm in the Central Valley, which is rural. They've talked to me about how when they engaged with Joteria, they also went back to have a conversation with their brother because their brother's also a gay man. So they're, and again, he uses that very intentionally. His brother identifies as a gay Latino versus he identifies as queer, or now like he's engaging in like I identifying as Joto, right? Like in this identity and conscious rising that is happening to him. But like he really brought this conversation back home, right? And it's been a source of tension because his brother's like, but that's bad, right? Like he's still very much reciting and like that's a really bad term, and that's caused a lot of harm, right? And I'm like, and that is also true. And what would it mean to also going back to the reclaiming of the term, like where the term one of the stories where the term emerges, Joto, right? Or Jota, comes from the fact that in the late 1800s, right, during the Mexican Revolutionary War, the jail cells are identified through the alphabet A, B, C, whatever. Well, there was a J cell, right? La Jota. It just happens to be that all like gender expansive, queer and trans identified folk were put in that jail cell, right? So in the midst of being pulled out of the streets and put into jail, queer and trans people still found joy, right? And they would be loud and expressive. So the guards would be callen a las jotas, like shut up, like make sure that because they're in the J cell, las jotas. And then that became the term, right? So then they come out, or like, oh, eres una jota, you were in the jota cell, right? And then you start seeing kind of that like word kind of engage. But for me, so if we're following that, like I can like that genealogy of the term, that means that in the midst of the most, darkest, harmful moment, we were deciding to choose joy. So Jota comes from like we were so happy that you that's what you called us. So I choose to operate from that standpoint of Joteria and a Jota identity, right? And my student has kind of it's is wrestling with that, right? And I can tell them like you have to, but I think for me, I proposed to him that encounter, right? So going back to the like encounter a moment of past, present, and future, I offered him that encounter, and I think he's wrestling with it. And also and for me, the fact that he's wrestling with his brother about it, it makes me feel like he's aligning to like his Hotari identity and consciousness, right? And kind of like wanting his brother to come along, but his brother's still like trying to navigate his homonormativity because he's gay and married and has kids, right? And that piece. So for me, that's the most recently kind of this shows up.
Thank you, Angel. Angel, if you need to leave, I give you permission.
So do you want to say anything on here before you go?
I'll keep going. I'll say a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. For me, I feel like students already have some of these theories brewing in their minds and heads. Um, without reading about Joteria identity and consciousness, without reading about Mujerista consciousness, the students are already building their resistance to the oppression and discrimination they've experienced either in life or on campus. And I think the university is a place where you tend to solidify that, right? Both your resistance and your identities. So when I give them essays on Chicana Latina activism or queer Latinx identity, they soak it in and they make it their own, right? That's why I said Mujerista and Joteria, these identities, they're living identities and they're living theories because as new generations come in, they expand it. And it's like the reason is because it's social justice based and our visions of social justice are constantly being expanded. If they're not, then it's not Joteria or Mujerista identity and consciousness, right? Because people will say to us, how many damn letters has to be in the LGBTQIA plus, et cetera? And we'll say as many as it takes, right? Rather than trying to be reductive, we try to be expansive. And so, the question earlier is like, how can you make sure that you're not leading people? That is the age-old Eurocentric patriarchal question, just FYI, because Eurocentric patriarchs have brainwashed us to believe that they can actually be objective, but they're not. They're very subjective, and that has come through in all fields. The racism, classism, sexism of white male researchers, and then white women, and even people of color who have been taught to act like white middle class people in the academy. Even we have biases that impact the very question that we ask. So rather than playing around with that, I personally use critical race theorists' work who challenge objectivity. I also use Sandra Harding's, who's a white philosopher, feminist philosopher. She's passed now. She wasn't a great professor, but I like this theory. She talks about strong objectivity. And strong objectivity comes from naming your positionality and being transparent with your reader versus trying to just pretend that you're being objective and that you use the scientific method to reach your conclusions. It also is paternalistic to imagine that our participants are just telling us what we want to believe. It's not, like that's not the case. They have their own values, perspectives, visions, and once they come into the questions or the work, they start to formulate more. So I appreciate those questions, and don't mean to like call anybody out for the question, but more to say that we have to question everything, right? Everything that we're taught in the academy, we have to question because it's usually not in alignment with the values of the communities that we come from. If it is, great, power to you. If it isn't, challenge it and create your own.
Other questions or thoughts, comments? Any last words that you both want to share?
I mean, I'll just share as I leave. Right. I think to Dr. Anita's point, right? Like it's not easy, right? But it's necessary. And I think for us, so much, we're seeing the Colonial University crumble, right? And I think there is an opportunity in that to think about what do we build instead, or how do we rebuild? Because also in the way that it was created wasn't working. So what does it offer us to think through these critical lenses, right? Of mujerista, of like Joteria, of for those folks who have been always in the margins, right? And I think there's an opportunity to reimagine our own work as scholar practitioners, right? Whether it be in practice or in research, like what is it that I want to ask differently, think differently, and do differently? And what are my commitments towards that, right? Because I think, as I mentioned, a lot of these things, with whether it be the characteristics or the other tenets of mujerista pedagogy, or the characteristics of Joteria identity and consciousness, or the contours of queer pláticas, they are, I, it requires a choosing, right? And I think that is up to you, right? Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there. But thank you so much for having me, Dr. Orozco. Thank you. And then if you all have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Dr. Anita, thank you. It was an honor to share
It
this
was
space
great to
with
see
you.
you.
Same. All right,
Thanks,
folks. Take
Mhm.
care,
Ángel.
everybody.
Tell your students I said hi.
I will. Bye.
Go there. No, I'm just kidding. That's a 50-minute
Yeah,
mark.
I'll give some final words as well, so I can get going. My my advice is read feminist work, implement feminist practice in everything that you do, intersectional feminism, but also old school Marxist feminism, liberal feminist. Like I was a women's studies professor for 15 years. And what I've learned in ethnic studies is that a lot of people don't go outside of their field, even though they're interdisciplinary. They stay within their knowledge base. Again, if we're trying to expand our vision of social justice, we must read the work of the people from those communities. We have to read disability justice work. We have to read Palestinian work. We have to read Black feminism. The people who are most marginalized in those spaces are the people who can best teach us. If you've read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that's what he's telling us. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we risk being the oppressor, and even marginalized people risk becoming the oppressor, right? And I totally believe that because we are being colonized in the academy. We're being taught to look at things through a certain perspective. It is Eurocentric, it is patriarchal, it is ableist, it is ageist, all of the things. And, it is homophobic and transphobic because we are not centered. We are not, quote, important to schools or to higher ed programs or, other spaces. As you know, right now, the little things that we have gained in civil rights in cultural centers are being, slandered and eliminated. They're going up in fire in minutes. And that's because they never cared. They only did it to um, look like they cared about our communities. So please read our work and read the work of others who you will work with who are equally marginalized, minoritized, etc. Thank you for letting me speak.
Gracias, friend.
Thank you. Cuídense.